Good morning, everyone. So today's character strong lesson is still a continuation of empathy. Last class we talked about circles of care, so I had you guys have those 4 circles, and you put in the differences that you had with people and how easy it was for you to relate to them. So for me, one of the further out circles was people from a different country, so a different like culture maybe. And then one that was easier for me to understand was someone with a different like fashion sense. So those were my like 2 differences, extremes anyway. Because last time, like I said, we chatted about empathy in our circles of care. And the good news is that there are lots of ways we can work to bring people into our closer circles. So we might have had a lot of those differences out in further circles that were harder to relate to. But like they said, good news is there's easier ways to bring them closer in. So the question just to start and think about is we're going to choose a difference from the last lesson. So mine was like a different income and a different country that they were born in or lived in. And another one was they spoke a different first language. So those were my 3 like harder to identify ones with. So think about what yours were. What do you think someone who is different from you in this way might have a hard time understanding? So for me, if you speak a different first language, it might be hard to understand literally the language, like what you're saying might be hard for that person to understand. So if they spoke Mandarin and I speak English, we might have difficulties communicating. For someone of a different income level, they might be hard to understand why I stress out about like my pay periods or my student loans and having to pay those back because maybe they have a higher income level than me, or maybe they have a lower income level than me and they can't understand why I'm stressed about student loans when they should be like, I might be stressed about paying my rent, which some days I'm still stressed about. So you just need to do that right now and think about what they might have a hard time understanding. So remember, the thinking part of empathy can be improved in a lot of ways, like learning about the history of certain groups, maybe that you find difficult to understand, maybe spending time just listening and learning from people who are different than you, and trying to understand what we actually have in common, even when we feel like there are a lot of differences between us. So it's kind of putting on a different lens or perspective and trying to focus more on what we have in common than what's different. So there was a lesson activity, but I am going to try and save time for you guys, and we're just going to talk about some of these things. So I'll put all the questions up. So one question I do want us to think about is I want us to think about like students or even staff at the school. I know you haven't met that many of them in person, but you can even think about staff and classmates at your last school or in middle school. And like what percentage of things do you think you have in common with the most students? So I mean, just thinking about like how schools are usually when we're in person and even like getting to know you guys now, I would say a lot of you guys have like a good like 60 to 75% of things in common. Like a lot of you, when we're doing these activities or especially in advisory, you guys are starting to connect on different things based on your like Google little like icons that you have. When I ask like what you guys like to do for fun, you guys talk about it. So just think about things like that. And I mean, you all go to the same school, you're all in the same grade, you all have the same teachers for the most part. So already you have a lot in common. And then thinking about that, does that make empathy harder or easier? If you have more in common with someone, do you think it's making empathy, like understanding them, harder or easier? So I just kind of want you to think about that. And then another one that I wanted to talk about was, sorry, hold on. Oh, talking about how differences and similarities can help us better understand where people are in our circles of care. That was the next one I wanted to talk about. So when we learn about each other's differences and similarities, maybe we can connect with someone because you didn't know that they liked the same Starbucks drink that you liked, or that they even like Starbucks. Or maybe you found out someone else doesn't eat meat and you don't eat meat. So when you learn or you like talk about and you're open about sharing your like interests and what you're about, like your differences and similarities, when you're just openly sharing these or just in casual conversation, if they just come up and you share, it will help us better understand where people are, and it'll help us understand where they're coming from. And then maybe we can have more empathy for them. So, like, I grew up in Greendale, Wisconsin, which is a more like affluent neighborhood. And at certain times, my family wasn't affluent, and it was really hard for me to connect with people when they were shopping at like high end. At that time, high end was like Abercrombie and Hollister. I know you guys have a different idea, but we're talking about the 2000s here. And I couldn't afford it. And some days I would be made fun of about the clothes that I had on because I couldn't afford to go to those stores. So that like was a little different from me, but those people that were making fun of me, they never asked like, "Oh, I like your jeans, like where did you get them?" Or they never got to know me and knew that I came from like a single parent home. So if they would have asked those questions and found out that I'm different than them, then maybe they could understand why I wore clothes from like Kohl's or JC Penney instead of Hollister and Abercrombie. So just with that, I think if people would have asked me or if they did get to know me, then the care level would have been easier for them, or they would have empathized more with me and maybe not brought up like that I didn't have the right clothes on. I know that's kind of like a superficial example, but it's the first one that came to my mind. And then just a few of those questions I'll ask you kind of to think about in your exit ticket. But this was last week's character dare. So we'll move on to this week's. So it's titled A Few New. So your goal or your task is to choose 3 people in your life and see if you can ask a creative question with each of them to discover something you have in common. So right now we're trying to build on commonalities and similarities to realize that people aren't as different as we thought that they were or think that they might be. You're going to try to choose a friend, a family member, someone you don't know as well, or feel like you don't have much in common with. So you can choose like a teacher if you don't think you have anything in common with a teacher. You could choose like say a neighbor, like a family member, just anybody that you think you might not have a lot in common with, because you're going to try and identify with them and bring up some similarities. So you're going to try to discover some common ground with each of these 3 people and write down some and write them down somewhere to share. So whatever you find in common, write it down somewhere. Also, be prepared to share the fun, weird, or unique questions you ask to find this new data. So be willing to ask kind of like off the cuff questions. Like I asked my advisory, did you guys watch The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix? And like everybody said no. And I was like, oh, well, I did. So I felt kind of awkward, but it's okay. I'm opening up and I'm trying to see if like I'm connecting with you guys. Or I asked like if anybody watched The Mandalorian. I actually don't watch The Mandalorian, but my boyfriend does. So I've seen like bits and pieces. I think the child, which has a name now, is adorable. But besides that, I don't really have any thoughts on The Mandalorian. But again, I was just trying to make a connection with everybody. And I know a lot of people do like The Mandalorian, so I just tried to ask about that. It doesn't have to be about TV shows, but just try and find something in common with other people. And then our quote for this week is, our patience will achieve more than our force. And at first, when I read this, I had to really think about it. I was kind of confused. I'm not going to lie. I was like, I don't get it. So after marinating and thinking about it, I realized that it means like having patience and sitting back and letting people maybe come to you or information come to you, or just like I said, observing will achieve more and you'll get further with someone than like forcing things on them. So if you tell them, oh my gosh, this like makeup is so great, girl, you got to try it, and you're like forcing it and pushing it on them, they're going to be like, no, girl, like I'm good with my makeup. Or if you think that this new game is so amazing and everybody has to get on it and you got to try it and log in and here's your stuff, I already created it for you. Like your friend's probably not going to want to do it because you're like forcing it and pushing it on them. Like just lightly bringing it up in conversation and like giving them time and patience and just kind of like backing off a little bit, maybe they'll come around and they'll be like, you know what, that book was really good. Thanks for recommending it to me. So that's kind of what I think of as patience will achieve more than our force. Same thing with our empathy. If you're really trying to connect with someone, don't force it. Over time, you'll see that the people that you have things in common with, they'll start becoming like, it'll become clear. So I've noticed this on my own social media. If I've been sharing something, so like I share a lot of like my workouts and stuff that I do in the morning, or I share a lot about being a teacher. I found that a lot more people that are teachers or that like fitness or both follow me and start talking to me about stuff like that. And I'm not like forcing it. I'm not going out there and finding every teacher and following them and trying to make a connection with them. It just happens over time naturally. So that is our lesson about empathy today. I know we're kind of going a lot into empathy. I think we have one more lesson, and I hope you guys learned something new. But let's go out there and share some similarities with people. And I totally don't mind if you guys ask me. I'm willing to open up and share with you all.